So Jesus said to one of his closest, most beloved disciples, Peter, said, "Get behind me, Satan." It's a very interesting thing to do, isn't it? Calling one of your best and closest friends the devil or Satan. What's that all about? We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But first, we'll recap kind of how we got here, which is the idea of spiritual battles. My notion that we have an option of being a theist or an atheist, and if a theist, then Christianity makes the most sense. We'll discuss more about that in the future, whether Christianity makes more sense or does not. But if you're a theist, you're a realist. You recognize a reality outside of yourselves. And if a Christian, then you recognize that reality includes a code of conduct that is outside of ourselves on two basic levels. One level for everybody to see through reason and rationality, kind of the Immanuel Kant idea of ethical formalism, categorical imperative, all of that kind of stuff. A couple maxims to live by: treat every human being as an end in themselves and not merely a means to achieve an end. They're more important than anything that we're going to achieve. All of those things are important, and so it gets us one understanding of the rules and the laws that are universal and apply to every person at all places, at all times throughout the world, right? Those categorical imperatives, the laws that we must live by. If you don't want to go all the way down the road with Immanuel Kant for ethical formalism, you can stop short of that, and you can come up with the idea of natural law. The Stoics were good at this kind of stuff, and they actually have some very good reasoning where they view the world as a machine, and that machine operates well when it has the right ingredients and the right parts. When you put in water instead of fuel, then of course that machine does not work. It's going to seize up and do everything that you do not want it to do, which is come to a grinding halt. So natural law is kind of an observation of the way things are. And it's not just a Western idea. The Eastern religions have an idea, something along those lines as well, starting with Moism, which is kind of ancient Chinese religion. It stopped at some point, but it carried on in some of its implications through Confucianism and Taoism and a couple of other things that we'd associate with the East. So natural law is there, but that additional level of rules to live by or maxims to live by, that natural law that cannot be seen and reasoned by everybody else, that makes sense to the believer, the one that is in relationship with God through Christ. And that's the one that calls for self-sacrifice, turning the other cheek, mercy and grace, where it's definitely opposed to the vengeance that we seek, and other types of things like that. Kindness and charity, which are ideas that are totally against an atheistic view of the world, particularly one that would suggest that we are Darwinian, survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest has no room for grace and mercy. It has every bit of a room for a psychopathic view of others as tools or pawns to be used and discarded at will, destroyed if necessary, to get them out of our ways. Well, if we start talking about life as a spiritual battle, fighting against those forces that would have us focus on the psychopathic view of the self, that I am the only one that matters, and everything else has significance only insofar as it supports my view of the world, and if it doesn't, then we can discard it, as many of us have been discarded over the past several years since COVID somehow flipped the switch and made it made it okay for friends and family members to reject one another that think differently than ourselves, which is incredibly sad. I've lost many friends and family members through that, but that's the way it is. So with the supererogatory or super duty thinking of Christian, the logic and the laws and rules that we would live by, the maxims, would be that power and wealth are not what we should be seeking, but service to others in whatever way we are best suited to render that service. So our strength lies in our service, in our love for others, in kindness, in restoring people to relationship with God. Ultimately, that's our goal. That's our goal. Reconciliation with God and forgiveness. Forgiveness as we have received forgiveness from God to begin with. So it's not something that we do simply because it fits with our view of the world, but because that is the nature of relationship with the one who created us all in the first place. So, forgiveness. Spiritual warfare, then we're fighting against everybody that is challenging those higher levels of meaning and existence. And those that challenge it are those that talk about sin, right? Doing all kinds of stuff that elevate my thinking as opposed to the thinking of the God that created us, that created this engine for us to fit into, not to fight against, but to fit into. The ideologies that promote immorality, right? And nihilism, for instance, and other ideas along those lines that have taken control of our very strange culture in these past 4 or 5 years. Anything that oppresses or persecutes Christians is inimical, actually against God. And so our battle is against those that would inhibit us, keeping us from restoring people to relationship with God. Is that battle always sweet and kind, loving and forgiving? Well, it is of people, absolutely. But of those ideologies, absolutely not. There's no room for truce, for ceasefire, from getting along with those people that, ideologically speaking, want to destroy our ideology and our understanding, our relationship with God, and especially the relationship with others, and their relationship with God. So our spiritual battle is against those who would fight for the very souls of the people that we know and come in contact with during the day, every day of our lives. Let's talk a little bit about that statement, "Get behind me, Satan." Seems pretty extreme, right? Jesus talking to one of his best friends, calling him a Satan, and saying, "Get behind me." Why did he do that? Because Jesus was telling his disciples, including Peter, that he was going to be taken. He was going to be taken and he was going to be crucified, strung up on a cross and killed. And that he knew that this was going to happen and did not oppose it. He was going to let it happen. And Peter said, no. Well, you don't have to give into that kind of stuff. We can stop that. We can stop it from happening. And Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan," because Jesus' purpose was to establish a relationship between humans and God that would be based upon, well, surrendering our lives to God. And he knew he had to do what he had to do in order to make that happen. Anybody that stood in the way, even his best friend, or one of his best friends, Peter, would be considered a Satan for standing in the way of making that happen, saving the souls of humanity back to relationship with God. So, Jesus' divine mission, his purpose for suffering that he knew was coming, he didn't want to stop it. He wanted to let it happen. The rest of us wanted to stop it because we think suffering and death is a horrible, horrible existence. Well, not existence, a cessation of existence. It's a terrible, terrible thing. My dad said something to me one time, and he doesn't remember it, I think. And he doesn't necessarily admit it because I don't think he understands the implications that I've associated with it since. And that is, God doesn't care if we die. God does not care if people die. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? Well, guess what? Every human being on earth, all 7 or 8 billion of us, have a death sentence. We are all going to die. And the billions, trillions that have lived before us, they've had that same death sentence. Death is going to happen. Death is not really the point. It's how we lived. That is the point. In any case, Jesus told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," because he was saying anybody that stands between human beings and their relationship with God is evil, is a Satan. So for us, in our spiritual battle, our spiritual fight, it's against anybody that would stand between human beings, people that we know, people that we don't know, in relationship with God. That is who we are battling. That is what we are battling. That whole idea. We battle individuals only insofar as they manifest that satanic thinking, that evil thinking. So we will fight them to the extent of getting that thinking out of them. Once that's done, however, the people, we continue to love the person. We just don't like the sin. So people that are disobedient, idolaters, those who would worship something other than God, people who are proud and arrogant that they are all that. We talked about atheists. Atheists or anti-theists, as I think is more appropriate for the people that we have against God these days. It's not that they deny that there is a God. They just are so opposed, rebellious, and hating of God that they want to live their own lives. They don't want anybody telling them what to do. That's the pride and the arrogance that I'm talking about. And those that would be unforgiving, like those who have canceled conservatives over the past 4 or 5 years, or Christians for holding on to the old ways that suggest that there is a God and we have a relationship with God, and that relationship has certain duties and implications. Those duties are that we should live rightly in a matter of super duties or supererogatories, right? Where we live a charitable, forgiving, loving, merciful life, self-service, self-denial, those kinds of things, those things that are counterintuitive to the atheists and the anti-theists. Yeah, people really hate that kind of stuff. So, doubt and unbelief, pride, self-righteousness, all of those things are the enemy. When we fight a spiritual battle, those are the things that we are fighting. Now, how do we see those things? Those things are all around us. And in coming videos, we're going to be talking about the manifestation of that spiritual battle, because that spiritual battle is everywhere. All right, we'll get into a little bit about fallen angels, those that are fighting the spiritual battle, but they themselves, like me, have failed in the past, or are failing even now, and yet are still fighting that spiritual battle. That's in our next video. Talk to you guys soon.